long have you been serving here?
I think it's 51 years.
51
It's
years.
51, yeah.
And today you are here because what's happening on Saturday?
Oh, I'm here because of the homeless meeting.
And what
Yeah.
does that look like for y'all?
It's something that we do. We enjoy serving people, and we're doing what we're supposed to do. I think that's what God wants us to do.
How many meals do you end up making?
125.
So y'all make it here.
We make it here, then they go out. I don't go out no more.
I hear that.
They go out, and then they just ride around, and certain spots they stop, and then they give meals to people.
Would you believe I really don't like cooking?
But when you do something for people who don't have, enjoy. I like doing this.
All right, y'all, thanks for joining us again with Talks at the Desk, an ELCA African Descent Ministries project for Black History Month. I'm Reverend Nicola Marie Peñaranda, Program Director for African Descent Ministries, and I am here in Ellicott City.
Yes, First Lutheran at First Lutheran with, am I saying my name?
Yes.
Okay, sorry. Yes. All right. I am the Reverend Tamika Young Savage, an associate pastor here at First Lutheran in Ellicott City.
I would love for us to just kind of kick off. How did you become a pastor? How did you get here?
Ooh. Well, the short answer is I'm not sure. Okay, like my dad's a pastor, but that was never in the cards for me.
Yeah.
And he's a pastor at a non-denominational church, so I wasn't born Lutheran. But the longer answer, which I'll try to keep a little short, is I was going through a phase in my life where I was kind of questioning my faith, questioning myself, and my relationship with God. And I ended up at a dinner church called the Slate Project, which is here in Maryland.
Yeah.
And we being at the time was my family, my ex-husband and our children and myself. We went to this dinner church and found this group of people who really cared about the world and the issues around us. It was very close to what happened with Freddie Gray and a lot of the uprising that was happening here in Baltimore, and just having really good conversations with people who seemed to care really kind of transformed my idea of what it looked like to be a follower of Christ, to speak on my faith in a real way. And of course, in that space, and I don't know if that's of course, but it is for me, there was a lot of Lutheran pastors, including a lot of women Lutheran pastors, and a Lutheran, Episcopalian, and Presbyterian pastor as well. So it just seemed more like available to me, that like the idea of something like that.
I think it's interesting because now, so you mentioned you're an associate pastor here, but one of the ways that I know of you is through this like podcast you created.
Yeah.
Can you tell us about that?
About For Collared Girls. That's my baby. So it's a podcast that I have with the Reverend Laura Kigweba James. We started it, gosh, we're on season 5, I believe. Yeah, it's been that long, right?
Yeah.
But we started actually while I was still in seminary and Laura was serving at a church in Baltimore City, and she is a pastor in the United Methodist Church. We actually met at the Slate Project dinner.
Wow.
Yeah. So a mutual friend of ours invited her to come to the dinner. And when I realized that she was a pastor, I was like, oh, you and I, we're gonna be friends because this is where I'm headed and I need you.
Yeah.
You look like someone I need. And we would have like conversations. She would invite me to come over doing like lunch at her church. And I just was really intrigued by what she was going through and curious and wanted to prepare myself for what might happen. And then we ended up having more and more conversations and wondering what it would look like to have a space for us to talk about our realities. And what I got out of for College Girls and what I continually get is this beautiful sisterhood that I have with Laura. We get each other,
Yeah.
and we make space for each other, and we love on each other. And one of the things that as I grow and mature as a human is I learn to value the importance of relationships, specifically friendships, because we as women, we are told that like the thing we need to value is a romantic relationship, right? And however that looks, whatever orientation, right? It's still that emphasis, right, on romantic relationships. But I am really understanding the true value of sisterhood and friendship with Laura, right? We've gone through so much together, and we find God's grace within each other. It's just like such a beautiful connection to have with a person. So yeah.
And I think the investment that needs to be had in those like platonic relationships is like so important, and I hate that we undervalue it, because in reality, when we talk about like, when we stress the romantic relationships, we are taught that like there is this one person in the world that is supposed to be everything for you. And like, that is irresponsible, right?
100%.
Like
It's so unfair.
yeah, right.
Right?
Because they can't be everything
They
for you.
cannot.
And that's why friendships are important, because like you're also saying that like I value you, and you can value them as a whole person, but like in this area, right? Like this is how I know where we connect, and like I don't need to put this unrealistic expectation on you if that's something you can't meet.
Exactly. Yeah. Bell Hooks talks about that in All About Love, and the value of like relationships, like friendships, because it is only in friendships that where we will have, for the most part, where we will have really good boundaries.
Yeah.
Because we won't accept certain things from friends that we might accept from a romantic partner because of the toxic understanding that we've all, well, I don't know if all of us are here, but like where many of us have learned to be in relationships. And I was like, she's absolutely right, you know? And I see that with Laura, right? And I see for College Girls being that, like a place of sisterhood, a place of friendship, a place of cultivating love and care for one another. And not, we didn't start that, you know, but we're trying to illuminate that as like, this is what it looks like to be like the sisterhood of Black women, because that is like the main goal for College Girls. It really is. It's to center us, to center our voices, to talk about the things that we see happening within our communities from a womanist perspective, and to give us the space to breathe, right? Because in most other places, it either feels like you're being tokenized or you have to speak on behalf of a group, and it's really nice just to be.
What would you say are some other really significant topics in our like greater Black church that like we should be addressing?
I think we need to talk more about the women who really did pave the way, and and maybe even like walk ourselves through the complicated conversations around misogynoir and patriarchy that still exists within our greater churches, right? But even with that, there's always been women, and it's not just the church mothers. Like, it's not.
Yep.
There have been clergy women. There have been women who, like, really did some phenomenal work in Black churches for Black people, right? For our liberation, for the movement of the church, that I think we hear in bits and pieces, but it would really be beautiful for us to fully see the bigger picture of how throughout time and space, right? We have always been where we are, if that makes sense, right? Like, we've evolved into where we are now, right?
I was just talking with Reverend Kelsey Brown up at Jehu's table, and something significant she said to me was that, the ELCA does not realize how often Black women come through for the church.
Yeah. Right, and I want to counter to the narrative that it's because men have not stepped in or stepped up. And it's not like counter to.
Yeah.
In fact, I think it's more about what did we do to survive and continue to do to survive in a world that devalues who we are, right? That incarcerates our people, that kills our people, that enslaved our people, right? How did we then take the means that we had, the power that we had back, and use that in a way that empowered each other and moved us forward? And I think there's a lot of history that we miss when we either take on the more understood and dominant cultural conversations around patriarchy, or when we accept the reality that somehow, Black women and Black men can't and don't do things together and empower each other, right? Which, again, is not the full story, right? I mean, that's not to say that it didn't exist and it still doesn't. I mean, I still get questioned about being a pastor all the time. And I'm not gonna, air out all the things, but like, that's a reality. Okay, well, I'm just. I mean, it's from all groups of people.
Absolutely.
And it has happened among Black men, specifically, in ways that I was like, all right, like,
Yeah.
But also, I also know that is not the full narrative of the Black church.
Yes.
It is not the full narrative of who we are and have been. And I think if we were to really consider that there are other parts to our story, I think more of us would feel empowered and less like we have to keep fighting against something.
Yes. Why is it important for Black Lutheran creatives, to be creating a space for themselves? Why is that important, especially in the ELCA?
I think it's important because we cannot rely on the system that is oppressive to be the thing that frees us. And it is so important that we understand our value outside of an institution, and to create and to imagine and dream and be who you are is 100% resistant to that idea that somehow we are bound to an institution that does not value us.
Yeah.
And so it's just so beautiful to see how much people have within them and how much they're willing to share, especially in a space that doesn't deserve it, right? And I just really very much value people's willingness to be who they are, to create, to share something of themselves, and not for the sake of being accepted, but because that's who they are, right?
I really would just love to hear from you. How did you get here? Why are you Reverend Angela? Why are you Reverend Gia?
That's a very long and depth question, isn't it? I'll start because Reverend Angela looked at me, so I'll start. I grew up in a conservative Baptist, Black Baptist church. I grew up with a whole bunch of other mothers and communities and people taking care of us. My mother was my parents were divorced when I was younger, and so I learned a lot about the power of community at a very young and early age, and that was my world. Even starting from in a conservative space, as I've kind of twisted and wound, I found that all of those hills and valleys have led me to a space where I've said, okay, God, there's nowhere to go but up. I don't understand why the reflection looking back at me from my community or another community doesn't look like the image that I thought it would be.
Yes.
I don't understand. And so looking for those answers and seeking those answers took me out of that conservative Baptist upbringing, took me through exploring non-denominational churches, and landed me in the ELCA, where I said, I want to know more about these people who know a different type of God than a God of judgment and fire and brimstone that I had known. I wanted to know more about that God of grace. And even now, as I look back, I say to myself, I remember feeling that call to be a pastor and saying, I can't be a pastor because that reflection, I'm nothing. I look nothing like what every other pastor has looked like. I am a woman. I'm African American. I'm broke. At the time, broke. Let's broke and broken. And did I say broke? Did I say that? Yes. I was divorced. I had children. All these things that had been minuses and negatives in my life. And somebody tells me, no, that's exactly why you need to be a pastor. And I had never heard that before, that my deficits, that my valleys were actually hills and mountaintops for God to use me with. And when I've seen what God has done with my scars and stretch marks, I want to tell people about that. I want them to learn to celebrate all that they are and all who they are, because I'm celebrating.
There's the walk of being a pastor in knowing that God has called me. And then there is serving in a denomination. And so they are not always synonymous. And so sometimes I find myself reminding myself, sometimes hourly, to make sure that I walk circumspectly because God has called you. Now you find yourself serving in the Evangelical Lutheran Church in America, but it is God who has called you. Because there are so many people, that mountain. You know how we have that great cloud of witnesses that support us? I'm telling you, to be a Black woman in the ELCA, there's another cloud of witnesses that are there to drag us down. And my gosh, that cloud, you understand? That cloud that pulls and tugs almost daily. It's that one where it says no, I know that God has called me. And folks will try to penalize you. Oh, you're not a lifelong Lutheran? Mm-hmm. And it's like, you've never been anywhere. Mm-hmm. You've been in your grandmother's church, and you've been in your parents' church.
You've been to your campus ministry? You've been to a service
You
of
know,
that.
it's kind of like, you can, God is, hold on to your hats, everywhere. Everywhere. It's great that you serve a Lutheran God. Now get on out there and serve an everywhere God.
There you go.
Get to know some everywhere Jesus.
There you go.
But oftentimes we're taught racism as these very blatant acts, right? Like you was called the N-word, right? Like that is like, yes, we know that's racism, right? Someone burning a cross in front of your house, right? The things that we're like literally taught, someone discriminated against you. But what is woke white racism?
So if you take the word to be awake, right? If you are awake, it is literally just a state of being. It's saying that you are not asleep. It doesn't say anything about your awareness of what's happening. It doesn't say anything about, like, I'm just awake. It doesn't say I'm dressed. It doesn't say I'm eating. It says that my eyes are open, okay? And so that's kind of this piece. And I think that's so important because what happens is white folks' eyes are opened and they can see things that are happening. And automatically assuming because I can now see when before we couldn't, I now understand everything that's happening. That is the assumption that they have, right? And that a lot of folks have. So the idea, and so because I understand, well then for sure let me take the liberty to go ahead and decide how things are supposed to navigate, right? And so I always go back to say, your eyes may just be opened and you can see things, but let's just be mindful of the fact that that doesn't mean that we understand. We don't understand complexity, depth. I open my eyes, it's fuzzy. I can just, you think about it. I woke up this morning at 6:30, it was fuzzy. I mean, it doesn't mean I know anything, my breath, none of it. I say the same thing, and I think that piece of this idea of because my eyes are opened or someone's eyes are open, that now they have full understanding and clarity of this situation and have command of the situation.
This is when I first got here. And then after that, maybe a few days after that, we were having our adult retreat. And during the retreat, one of the parishioners who was attending the Microaggressions workshop says to me, "Pastor, I know this is a microaggression, but I just want to touch your hair." And so my hair is all down. She leans in there and gets both hands in there. And so now I'm going through my Rolodex. How do I respond? How do I respond? All I have is my mom saying, respect your elders, be polite. That's all I have. And I'm like, dang, that's not working. So then I just turn around, I go to the little, to our little agenda. I say, well, what's next? And I see lunch. And I'm like, hallelujah, lunch. I'm very good at lunch, very good at lunch. So I said, good, we'll go to lunch. And then she comes up next to me and she says, see, that wasn't so painful now, was it? And so I go down to the lunchroom and I look around. All I know is who I'm not going to sit with. So I sit at another table. And so one woman, she says, Pastor, when did you join the Lutheran Church? And I said, oh, shit, I can't do this. I look at the next one. Yeah, when did you join the Lutheran Church? Then I look at the next one. Yeah, when did you get to the Lutheran Church? So then I look at the last one who I think is the wokest. And she says, and I'm waiting for her, like, rescue me. And she says, well, that is a good question. When did you get to the Lutheran Church? And then I look over at the last person sitting there. And she says, she can read my face. And she said, what the hell does it matter? You're here now, let's eat. And I was like, thank you, Jesus. All of that? Can I just go to a conference and not have to A, establish my pedigree, and B, keep your hands to yourself. Isn't that what we tell our children?
And even how you describe that story, like what came up for me was like sexual assault. And and like that's how you do, right? It's like I know this is inappropriate, but let me now invade your body. And then the end of like, it wasn't that bad, right?
So violated.
Like, violated.
Yeah,
like,
so violated.
That's what comes up for me when I hear that story. And people think that that's appropriate.
It's ownership of Black bodies.
Yeah.
I want you to know you are the pastor in this situation, but I am supreme. That is woke white racism. I just want you to know who's supreme.
I am really captivated by you talking about power and also acknowledging like you being clergy. And this has happened now in multiple stories that y'all have shared of like literally being the leader, right? That's what we're taught in seminary, right? You are the leader, you are the authority. We're taught boundary classes because we are so responsible for all these different things as leaders. And so many times has power been taken from us.
Right.
But that same power, I'm curious to hear from any of our counterparts how often power is taken from them in situations like that. What we need to also be aware of as we speak of these previous and present day lynchings is, Dylan Roof was an ELCA Lutheran. Yep. One of the Columbine shooters was a Lutheran. Minneapolis, you can drive all through here and it's Lutheran churches, Lutheran services. So you have to, if you are going to be a person in this church, you have to ask yourself, what is then your call to action? What is your responsibility in addressing racial injustice and especially anti-Blackness that has been deeply embedded in our history? And that's not y'all's responsibility to answer. So that's not a question for you, but it's for anyone else that's watching this to think, what do I need to be doing? What does my church need to be doing? And how do we push the institution and all of those who are involved in moving us in a direction where we are creating an equitable and just spiritual community? Because that's the whole thing around these denomination conversations about the everybody God and the Lutheran God and how we box ourselves off. We put everything else out of our responsibility. And that's irresponsible as church and in our denomination, because then we invite us in and we get hurt and we get left out and we wait 3 to 5 years for a call and we have to deal with abuse and we have to run from people calling us the nigger pastor, because unfortunately that's not the first story I've heard either.
Right. Yeah, and that's the hard part. I'm approved in the ELCA. And made a really hard decision to halt my candidacy, and it's for exactly the reasons why you're saying, exactly what you're lifting up is that I could not, I was under the impression that's very nice. I was told that's even nice. I was misled, and into believing that once I finished, seminary and the candidacy journey, as a trained mission developer, that a call or a mission, new start, or something would be on the horizon. And as a single mother working 3 jobs for 4 of my 5 years of seminary, and going through CPE, I was crawling to that finish line, only to find that no, that's not the case, that the average wait time for a clergy woman of color is 5 to 8 years. And I said, okay, I have a choice. And my children deserve better than that, right? I still believe, and we all know I'm so grateful, as she said, for the cloud of witnesses to be embraced and be a part of the ELCA family, and to still be a part of this family because I'm still Lutheran. This is my heart. But I lift that up because it's so hard for me to encourage other siblings of color to come into a denomination that doesn't love me well, and that didn't love me back, or doesn't love my siblings well. It's hard for me to do that, right? And maybe the goal shouldn't be to diversify or grow youth or do anything, but to say maybe our margin's going to be to turn and do some inner work for the next 10 years so that we can change the system so that we can love on people better the way that we need to, right? But right now, I feel like that's where things are. It's like and it's hard because how do we love people well in a system that is dysfunctional? How do you do that without creating more? We are what we eat. So I think that's the challenge for us as Lutheran-hearted pastors, right? Is from the pulpit where we say and we believe that we are sinners saved by grace, and we believe this, and yet we still are holding, either pain and heartbreak on one side, but also the reality that we are supporting congregations and a system that isn't supporting us back.
And so there is a freedom in me vocalizing that I will not be complicit in my own oppression. And to tell my kids, you do not need to be complicit in your own oppression, and try to figure out what that means. It's very challenging. And I don't know how to do it well. But I'm giving myself, at least that permission. Because I used to be, I would say, it's kind of like, I don't want to be too negative, but if the ELCA were a man,
Right.
I'd have left him a long time ago.
Right.
Right?
Right.
But instead I find myself saying, oh no, he doesn't hit me.
Right. He's not always mean to me.
I mean, because sometimes he's really not. I mean, he pushes me, he shoves me, but
He's working on it.
he pays me nice.
And he says that he's sorry.
He says he's sorry. He does. Look at this. Look at this racial justice statement he wrote me.
He's sorry. Seeing young people that are popping up and are realizing, I'm proud to say that I'm a Gen Xer, but to see these Gen Zers that are coming up that are saying, that are making different choices and doing different things, how am I going to show up in these white spaces in a different way? I say to myself, wow, they are doing so many more amazing things than we ever were. Right? Like just to see them, to kind of go and to take that and go. And I say, all right, if I want them to do that, the reality is that, we probably aren't going to see the change that we need in our lifetime. And if I want to see them, if we want to see our kids do and be, then what needs to happen right now so that we can continue to push this envelope a little bit? Like, what is it that needs to happen right here? Like, I'm looking at my son who's 14, who is taller than me, and if you looked at him and you just woken up in the morning, so your eyes were blurry, then you probably would think he was a grown person. He's a grown man. And to see him cowering like he was when the police showed up to the neighbors next door reminded me to say to myself, they probably don't know that he still plays video games and farts on his sisters, and he's just a kid at heart, right? And so I say that because that's the thing. It's like our reality, right? And what you're lifting up, our reality is like, this is today. And yet a part of that work that you're inviting pastors to is like, not just for today, but what do we have to do? Because we know that tomorrow's coming.
When I came back from internship, it was fall 2017. I met up with a few folks from the African Descent Strategy team. You were there, and I had looked at you and said, is it true that we have never had a Black woman bishop? Do you remember what you said to me?
You want to take me back there, right? You're going to make me cry because I'm remembering that conversation, but the fact that we had never had an African American woman bishop, and then to look at you on your journey and basically see the gift of today and the hope for the future, and then to be able to know that there are so many women who could have been bishop if it were not for the systemic racism that prohibited them. You know, and so, you know, my mind automatically goes to Reverend Dr. Wivetta Bullock, you know, who is one of my role models, one of my mentors. And just to think about that caliber, Maxine Washington, you know, all of those just strong women who have served this church and served this church well, who have all of the gifts to be in this office, and were never given the opportunity. And being in Southeastern Pennsylvania Synod and really watching us, we're such a diverse Synod, we're so progressive and really open to the Holy Spirit. And so I actually, when we went into the process of allowing candidates to pre-identify, I went to Chicago and I had a conversation with the Reverend Dr. Wivetta Bullock to say to her, would you allow me to put your name in, you know, or would you pre-identify? And we had a good conversation, and then she just looked at me and she said, but Sister Pat, why would I put my name in when they already have an African American woman who could serve? And I just looked at her and she said, you. And I was like, oh no, I'm not doing that. I said, I don't sense that. I'm not feeling that. And she said, well, just do this. She said, it's not up to you anyway. She said, it's up to the Holy Spirit. She said, you promised me this. She said, just say to me, she is so powerful and such a woman of the Spirit. She said to me, she said, just do this. Don't take your name out. She said, just don't take your name out. She said, if it's what God has for you, she says, then it's what God has for you. And if not, and so the obedient sister that I am, I did just that because I didn't pre-identify. And I was just like, okay, if my name goes up, I'm not going to take it out. And as they say, the rest is history.
We're in a place now in our church where just when you look at African descent candidates for ministry, we are increasingly growing Black women and non-binary folk, but a large, vast amount of Black women coming into ministry. And you being who you are, what are your hopes and prayers for these upcoming generations?
Oh my goodness. My hope for them is that all of us who go before them would make the way smoother so that they won't have to do the hurdles and the struggles that we've gone through, that we make the way easier for them. And also that they see us as elders that they can lean into. So when the challenge comes, you never face a challenge alone. Of course, God is with you, but you have someone that you can walk with, someone you can talk with, someone you can bounce things off of. So that is my hope for them. And my hope continually is that we, church, would continually see the gifts and present the opportunities for them to serve. And not just an opportunity to serve in that church in the city that is predominantly Black, but in that church that's rural, in that church that's suburban, in that church where your gifts match the needs of the congregation.
What do you think the church needs to know about cultivating and raising up African descent leaders for our future church? It's a big question, so.
No, it's a big question, and we make it so complex for the church, but really just live your creed. You know, live what you recite. Walk in the theology that you profess, that you're going to love God and you're going to serve your neighbor. That we know that in Christ there is no male or female. There's no slave, there's no free, there's no Greek, there's no Jew.
Yeah.
Live it. We have to stop talking the talk and walk the walk. Create space for people to show up and to be welcomed for who they are. We are such a great church, and we have wonderful social statements and wonderful documents that say this is who we are and this is what we're going to do, and we just have to live into it. You know, we freed in Christ, so we have that. We did the homosexuality study. We did all of that. We made the apology to people of African descent. How are we living into those things? We have the authentic diversity. How are we implementing that? You know, so what are we doing? We're talking about in this document,
Yep.
It says there will be reparations
Yep.
for people of color. How are we having conversations with people of color to say, so what reparations look like for you? Live into the documents that we already have in place. I think one of the things that gives people pause when they look from the balcony at the Evangelical Lutheran Church in America is that we have all of this, but we're not living into them. Yeah. So again, I'm like, show up and do what God has asked us to do.
Ooh.